For most of us, intimacy is driven by desire, connection, and love. But for the Spartans, it was none of these things. It was an order, a biological duty commanded by the state with one ruthless goal: to create the deadliest human weapons the ancient world would ever know. Spartans weren't nurtured as people. They were manufactured as soldiers. And their making didn't begin on the battlefield. It began in the bedroom. Forget the romantic myths of red cloaks and noble speeches. Behind the legend of the 300 lies a disturbing truth, a system of human engineering so cold and calculated it makes even the darkest dystopias seem merciful. At its core was complete state control over reproduction. In Sparta, personal choice meant nothing when it came to love or family. The government played matchmaker, pairing citizens not through affection, but strength. Old magistrates, men hardened by decades of battle, inspected young males like livestock, weighing height, stamina, and ancestry. He was the broad-shouldered warrior born of decorated bloodlines. She was the strong, fertile woman with wide hips and an unyielding frame. Beauty mattered only as proof of good health, a sign of stronger offspring. These weren't marriages of passion, but of policy. Cold, strategic unions designed to breed perfection. Love was irrelevant. Desire was optional. The human body belonged not to itself, but to Sparta. Every citizen's blood was state property, a resource for war. Women's lives, too, were reshaped into something almost unrecognizable. They were not seen as wives or mothers, but as vessels of the Spartan nation. Their worth was measured by their ability to bear healthy children. From girlhood, Spartan females trained not to fight but to give birth. They ran, wrestled, and hurled javelins, all to strengthen their bodies for motherhood. Their will didn't matter. Their bodies did. They were taught that their battlefield was the birthing bed, and their highest honor was delivering the next generation of warriors. But Sparta's system reached even darker depths. What happened when a hero's wife could not conceive, or when she birthed weak children? And what of a woman with extraordinary health married to an aging or frail man? Sparta had an answer, one that would chill even the most hardened soul. The state encouraged a strong warrior to father a child with another man's wife. It wasn't seen as adultery. It was civic duty. A woman's womb could be loaned in service to the state, and often her husband approved. Producing a strong child, even from another man, was considered an honor to the household and to Sparta itself. Concepts like love and fidelity were sacrificed under the iron boots of state eugenics. The purpose wasn't happiness, it was perfection. And when a Spartan child was finally born, it wasn't a celebration, it was a test. The newborn wasn't placed in its mother's arms, but taken to a grim hall called the gathering. There, aged warriors known as the Gerousia awaited, men who had seen death countless times. They examined each baby without emotion. Naked, trembling, the infant was inspected from head to toe, its legs, its spine, its cry. Every flaw, every hint of frailty could decide its fate. This wasn't cruelty for its own sake. To Spartan logic, it was survival. They were a small warrior caste surrounded by enemies and enslaved helots who outnumbered them 10-1. Weakness meant danger, not just for one child, but for the entire state. A fragile infant wasn't a burden. It was a threat. Mercy today could mean destruction tomorrow. The Spartan creed was simple: strength or death. The council's word was final: no appeals. If the child passed, it was returned to its family, not as a son, but as a soldier in training already claimed by the state. From his first breath, his destiny was sealed, but if the elders declared him unfit, his end came not by sword or drowning, but by something colder. He was taken to the barren slopes of Mount Taygetus, to a place called the Apothete, the deposits. There, among the stones, the infant was left to the night wind, the frost, and the beasts. A quiet death, unseen, unspoken, accepted. To the Spartans, this was not murder. It was nature correcting itself, returning the imperfect to the earth, a grim offering to the strength of the collective. Passing the inspection was only the beginning. From that moment, the child's life became a slow march toward war, and for his parents, duty didn't end with birth. The state demanded more, constant creation of new bodies to feed its war machine. In Sparta, reproduction wasn't a privilege. It was an order. They practiced what we now call eugenics centuries before the term existed, the belief that humanity could be refined through Selective breeding. That idea didn't start in modern laboratories, and it began on these rocky hills. For the Spartans, it wasn't hatred that fueled it. It was pure, ruthless practicality. Weakness in any form had no place in their bloodline. To make this vision real, the most private human act became a public obligation. Love as we know it had no place in the Spartan design. From age 7 to 30, men lived in communal barracks surrounded by comrades, not family. Husbands crept from camp only under darkness, meeting their wives briefly and secretly, vanishing before sunrise to escape punishment. There was no family life, no tenderness, no time to build affection. A wife was a stranger chosen for her body, not her heart. Their union had a single mission: conception. Once pregnancy was expected, the husband returned to his true home, the army. The entire system was designed to crush emotional ties, to ensure loyalty only to Sparta. Strong family bonds were seen as dangerous. Romantic love was treated as treasonous distraction. The state even punished those who refused to marry or reproduce. A man who stayed single beyond the appointed age was branded disloyal, a deserter of his civic duty. During festivals, these men were stripped naked and paraded through the freezing streets, forced to sing mocking songs about their failure. They were denied the privileges of elderhood, shunned as examples of what happens when personal desire defies the state. The cost of this ideology was devastating. Compassion slowly vanished. Generation after generation learned to see tenderness as weakness. One's body belonged not to oneself, but to Sparta. Motherhood was not love. It was labor for the state. Children grew up not with affection, but with obedience. At the age of 7, a mother handed her son to the state, whispering only, "Return with your shield or on it." It wasn't poetic pride. It was the final echo of a culture that erased maternal love and replaced it with fanatical devotion to glory. If conception and inspection were the forging, then age 7 marked the assembly, the creation of the weapon itself. The state that had engineered his birth now came to claim his life. This was the beginning of the Agoge, the harshest, most effective training system in human history. A program that shattered children and rebuilt them into perfect warriors. Imagine it. You're 7. Torn from your mother's arms. She doesn't cry. She simply hands you over. From that moment, your new family is your unit. A group of boys your age living in cold barracks. Your father becomes an instructor, not to teach words but endurance. You will not live in a true home again until you are 30, and by then the word home will mean nothing. The first lesson of the Agoge was simple and merciless. Comfort is the enemy. The Spartan boy slept on a bed he made himself. Reeds ripped by hand from the banks of the Eurotas River. No knife allowed. His only clothing was a rough tunic, worn through the blistering summers and freezing winters. And above all, he was kept hungry and always hungry. His rations were deliberately small, a precise starvation meant to teach resourcefulness. But this hunger wasn't just cruelty, it was strategy. The boys were expected to make up the difference by stealing. In Sparta, theft wasn't shameful. It was a skill. It trained stealth, patience, and cunning. A warrior who couldn't sneak into an enemy camp and take what he needed was worthless. So they learned to move like shadows, scavenging through their own city like wolves. But if you were caught, the punishment was brutal. You'd be flogged mercilessly, not for stealing, but for being caught. The sin wasn't theft. It was failure. The message was burned into them. Success justifies everything. Failure has no excuse. On the battlefield, being caught meant death. Not just for you, but for everyone beside you. The Agoge made sure that lesson was etched into flesh. This wasn't training soldiers. It was manufacturing predators, and fierce, cold, and calculating. In their world, morality dissolved into one question: did you succeed or not? They learned to lie without hesitation, to disappear, to spot weakness, to obey instantly. They were brothers, but brothers bound by pain, rivalry, and fear. Starvation and theft were only the opening acts. What followed was far darker. Lessons meant to break the child's spirit before reforging it. The human body can adapt to hunger, cold, and pain. But the real battle of the Agoge was fought inside the mind. Sparta didn't just need strong bodies. It needed sharp minds and hollow souls, instruments of discipline loyal only to the state. Once the instructors had conquered the body, they turned to the soul. Their weapon was silence. Our word laconic, meaning brief in speech, comes from Laconia, the land of Sparta. That's no accident. Spartan children were taught that words were tools, not toys. Talking idly, making foolish remarks, or asking useless questions invited punishment. Teachers fired questions like arrows, demanding sharp, instant answers. Hesitation was met not with scolding, but with pain. Sometimes the instructor would bite a boy's thumb, a small but unforgettable lesson to think before speaking. Silence became armor. Every word had to land with purpose. But the cruelest lessons didn't always come from elders. They came from each other. The hierarchy guaranteed it. Older boys, called Irene, ruled the younger ones like tyrants, part commanders, part jailers. At meals, they launched verbal traps. Who is the bravest man in Sparta? What do you think of the king's last campaign? Is theft honorable? There were no right answers, only tests. A pause, a wrong tone, a flicker of fear, all invited humiliation or blows. This wasn't random bullying. It was calculated cruelty. A state-approved system to forge minds that could stay calm under interrogation or chaos. Each boy learned to think like a politician and fight like a beast. Every glance, every word was a minefield. Rivalry was currency. Aggression earned respect. Trust was weakness. Expose others' flaws, hide your own. Those were the commandments. It was the law of the pack, supervised by the state itself. And all this daily brutality led to one of Sparta's most chilling rituals. The ceremony at the altar of Artemis Orthia. The goddess of the wild and the home demanded not prayers, but blood. The boy's task sounded simple. Run, seize the cheese, and escape. But to reach the altar, he had to sprint through a storm of whips. Leather lashes cut the air, tearing into flesh with every step. It wasn't a race of speed or reflexes. It was a test of endurance, a trial of how much pain a future Spartan could bear without breaking. The real challenge was never about the cheese. It was about silence under agony, standing tall as blood poured without a scream, without a tear. To cry out was disgrace. Plutarch himself wrote of young Spartans dying at the altar, smiling as their blood soaked the earth, proud to prove themselves worthy. This was their final rite, the Agoge's closing ceremony, a baptism in blood meant to purge every trace of fear, forging men into living steel. But when a society burns away weakness, what pieces of humanity survive? What remains of the soul once it's hammered into a weapon? Sparta had built a paradox. Men of unbreakable strength yet empty hearts. Soldiers of flawless discipline yet warped morality. In their world, killing was noble and compassion could destroy you. They became perfect instruments of violence. And now the state demanded proof that their transformation was complete. That proof came in the form of something so secret few dared to name it. The Cryptia. It wasn't a normal unit. It didn't fight in ranks. It was far darker. A hidden death squad, a weapon of fear designed to silence Sparta's enemies from within. To understand it, you must grasp Sparta's greatest obsession: control. A small warrior caste ruled over an enormous enslaved population of helots, who outnumbered them many times over. The Spartans lived in constant dread of rebellion. Their answer? Terror. Precise, preemptive, merciless. Each year, a chosen few from the Agoge's elite, the strongest, cleverest, and most ruthless, were sent into the countryside with only a dagger and a scrap of food. By day they hid, by night they hunted. Their prey was not foreign invaders, but the helots, the enslaved laborers who fed Sparta. Yet they didn't kill randomly. They targeted the boldest, the confident, the ones who stood too tall. These boys became the scythe that cut down any stalk rising above the field. This was their final exam, their transformation complete. To kill an unarmed man in darkness was not war. It was a ritual of obedience, a psychological surgery meant to erase mercy itself. They no longer killed out of anger or defense. They killed because the state commanded it. To make it lawful, the government added its own sinister touch. Each year the Ephors, Sparta's ruling magistrates, formally declared war on the helots. This legal fiction meant that any helot could be slain without it being considered murder. The young killers of the Cryptia weren't criminals. They were heroes in the eyes of the law, performing their civic duty. It was bureaucracy turned into bloodshed. By the time his dagger was read, the Spartan youth was complete. Born as the state's property, forged in pain, stripped of emotion, and now proven capable of killing without hesitation. But what had he become? The defender of civilization or its most efficient predator? At 30, he was finally allowed to leave the communal barracks. Yet this freedom was an illusion. A new command awaited, to reproduce, to raise the next generation of weapons for Sparta. The killer was now expected to become a father. His bride, chosen by the state, was not a submissive wife but his equal in strength and resolve. Spartan women were not victims of the system. They were its pillars. While the boys survived the Agoge, the girls endured their own trials. Equally brutal, equally purposeful. In a Greece where women were silenced and hidden, Spartan women stood apart. They were educated, physically trained, and taught to manage estates and wealth. Why? Because Sparta's concern wasn't comfort, it was endurance. Every law, every child, every union served one mission: to create perfection in human form. Even the philosopher Plato admired the system from afar, thinking it mirrored his dream of an ideal state. But he misunderstood. Sparta's goal wasn't equality, it was efficiency. Women were trained not for partnership but for production. Disciplined vessels of strength, their affection replaced by relentless patriotism. A Spartan woman's worth was judged not by love, but by the strength of the sons she gave the state. They became legends of cold pride. Before battle, a mother handed her son his shield with a single command: return with it or upon it. When word of defeat reached the city, Greek mothers wept. Spartan mothers only asked, "Did we win?" One tale even tells of a woman who killed her own son for returning home in shame. These women were not passive witnesses. They were the guardians of Spartan ideology itself, both creators and enforcers of the machine. Marriage, too, was stripped of romance. It wasn't courtship but ritual. The groom didn't woo his bride and he abducted her. Her attendants shaved her head, dressed her in a man's cloak and sandals, and left her waiting on a bed of straw. The man came in darkness, fulfilled his duty, and returned to the barracks before sunrise. This strange ceremony had purpose. It ensured emotional distance. It prevented love from softening loyalty. By keeping meetings rare and secret, the state believed desire would remain high, conception more likely, without the distraction of tenderness. It was the apex of Spartan logic. Two perfect products of state engineering joined in shadow, bound not by love but decree, a soldier and a mother creating strength on command. But hidden within that perfection was a slow, silent decay, a poison that would one day bring even mighty Sparta to its knees. For a time it all worked flawlessly. Sparta ruled Greece with unmatched dominance, its warriors feared, its discipline legendary. But the flaw that would destroy it wasn't foreign. It was born from within, woven into the very system that had made it great. The first poison was demographic collapse. Sparta's ruthless eugenics, the exposure of weak infants on Mount Taygetus, the rejection of imperfection, created a dangerously narrow gene pool. Each warrior lost in battle was an irreplaceable tragedy, the end of a bloodline shaped through decades of precision breeding. Other cities could raise new armies. Sparta could not replace even 100 of its own. Its greatest strength, its exclusivities, became its doom. They were, quite literally, breeding themselves out of existence. The second poison was inflexibility. The Agoge produced perfect followers, not thinkers. Spartans could obey without hesitation but struggled to innovate or question. As warfare evolved, their rigid traditions froze them in time. They became flawless soldiers fighting ghosts of their past, unable to adapt to a world that demanded generals, not just warriors. And then came the most ironic downfall of all: success itself. Victory over Athens in the Peloponnesian War opened the floodgates. Persian gold and silver flowed into Sparta, corroding the iron discipline that Lycurgus had built. Wealth replaced virtue. Greed supplanted equality. Land ownership concentrated into the hands of a few. The same people who once scorned luxury became enslaved by it. The spirit of Sparta, forged on austerity and simplicity, began to decay from within. Then came Leuctra. On that fateful plain, Theban general Epaminondas changed history. Instead of spreading his army thin, he concentrated his left wing 50 men deep, and drove it like a spear straight into the Spartan right, where the king and his royal guard stood. Innovation shattered tradition. The legendary phalanx broke. For the first time in living memory, a Spartan king fell in battle. His army was annihilated beside him. Sparta's invincibility died that day. With hundreds of its finest men gone, the warrior caste was crippled beyond repair. The empire that had ruled through fear and discipline for centuries collapsed into irrelevance. By the time of Rome, Sparta was no longer a power, just a relic. Travelers came not to tremble before it, but to watch reenactments of its brutal customs, ghostly echoes of a civilization that once defined strength itself. In the end, the story of Sparta's breeding system is more than history. It's a warning. A people so obsessed with perfection that they sacrificed everything human to achieve it. They succeeded in creating the perfect warrior, and in doing so destroyed themselves. The machine that forged heroes eventually devoured its own creators, leaving behind nothing but ruins. And the whisper of a greatness built on cruelty, undone by its own perfection,